Hello, welcome to the section entitled Continuous Delivery. In this video, we're going to cover essentially elements that are represented in this diagram. Essentially, what it is an automated process that starts with source code and ultimately produces an updated workload running in some compute, right? For example, in Compute Engine or Kubernetes, whatnot. Okay, there are a couple major elements between the two, right? You obviously have a place that you're storing your source code. That's kind of the first piece. And we'll talk about Google's offering for that. There's a process where you take the source code and you build some artifacts, things that are, basically things that can get produced out of the source code. For the most common use cases, containers, and we'll talk about Cloud Build there. There's a place you need to store those artifacts, in this case, containers, and we'll talk about that as an example. And then finally, you need to figure out a way to take that artifact or, whatever the changes in the source code and actually deploy them to the compute. And we'll briefly talk about Spinnaker, but we'll also talk about other options there. Okay, so instead of starting at the beginning, we're going to kind of jump in the middle of this thing and talk first about container registry, because we'll do some simpler examples first. So for container registry, this is pretty simple. It's basically a place to store your container images, or Docker images, things you build from your source code. And probably the easiest way of seeing it in action, and I think we may have already seen it earlier, but we'll do it again, is take an actual running, just do it ourselves, take source code and then do something to produce a container. The example I'm going to draw from is I wrote another article here, which is slightly off topic, but it does talk about this particular example of Docker image I'm using. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the structure of the Docker image. We're just going to go ahead and do it. So the first thing you need to do, assuming you've already logged in to gcloud, before you try to use Docker, you have to run this command, gcloud auth config Docker. That basically authorizes Docker to push images to Google, essentially, to the container registry. So I'll just do it here. I think I've already done it earlier, but I'll do it again. Visibility. I think it says it's already done, right? So basically, it's add some entries to your Docker configuration with some credentials, okay? And then to build an image, you have to have, before I copy, I'm gonna copy this, but let's look at the, yeah, I'll copy this. Okay, so, so you can see it. Okay, so this example here is, except for this, ignore this Cloud Build YAML. We'll come back to that later. That's not necessary for this example. So you got this is a node package. So it's a, very simple node application. It just spits out hello world, right? And the key thing here is there's a Docker file. So let's look at the Docker file. Basically, this one just says, take it from the node Docker image, base image, set a worker directory, copy some files in, install the dependencies, copy the rest of the files over, expose port 8080 because it just runs hello world on port 8080, and then start the application, right? And then the actual application is in this index.js. That's outside the scope. Point is, there's a Docker file in this folder. So with that in place, with the Docker file here, I'm just running Docker. I have Docker installed locally, right? So that's not a Google thing. That's just Docker. I build the current directory, and then I'm going to tag it using this format. So GCRIO, your project name, the name of the container you want to use, and then this is a tagged version of it, right? Or image. This is the image. So this is hello world with tagged 010. So you just hit enter, and what that's going to do is this has nothing to do with Google still. This is just locally tagging it on your machine. So it ran quick because I did this earlier. So now I have an image on my machine. So Docker images. I may have done some other ones earlier. So yeah, I did. But here's the image I just built, right? And it's tagged like this, 101. These are the ones I was messing around, so ignore them. 9 seconds ago. Okay, so now that I've got, oops, now that I've got my image built on my machine, right? So I'm using my own machine to build, obviously. The next command I'm going to use is Docker push. So this is again Docker command, and it's pushing it to my project, to this hello world container registry, and then tagging it with 010. Now, the key here is I've already authorized Docker using the earlier command, so this should work, right? So it's, now this may take a second or not. Okay, that was pretty quick. So now it's got, I go to container registry. Let's see if I get this right. If I go to here, container registry, you can see I've got hello world, right? So this is a registry, this is a repository. So the main unit here is called a repository, hello world. And you can see this is the image, and then it's tagged 010. Okay, so the structure is you got container registry, you got your images, and then you got within your images, you've got repositories. You actually have your actual images, which are tags. Okay, let's go back to the article. Okay, so that's it for container registry, pretty straightforward. Google looks like they've released a next generation of container registry that can store other things other than Docker or container images. For example, it can contain things like npm packages, whatnot, right? And so there's basically the similar pattern we can do with artifact registry. So I think that's the main, so let's just go ahead and do it. So we can see what artifact registry looks like. So the first thing you need to do is you need to configure Docker to authorize it for a different location. And so I'm going to store my artifact registry in US Central 1. So that's why I'm using this command here. Actually, what I should probably do is go through the exercise of first creating registry, because unlike container registry, you actually have to go and create something. So let's do that actually. I'm going to push this try artifact registry. Okay, so, oh, I must have done one earlier. I thought I had deleted this one. Okay, well, I already had created one earlier. I'm going to go create a new one just for the exercise of this article. Or now what I should do is pause it. I'm going to pause the video, delete this one, and then recreate it essentially. So I'm going to pause. Okay, we're back. It only took a second to delete apparently. So I want to create another artifact registry. We're going to ignore this. Apparently there's a way to transition your existing containers you have or images that you have in container registry, right, over to artifact registry. But I'm not going to worry about that. So I'm just going to leave it like this. So I'm going to create a registry plus and my repository. So this way, in this case, unlike container registry, here you actually have to create your repositories. It doesn't auto create like the other example did. So here you can see you have to specify the type, right? So I'm using Docker region, US Central 1, and then I hit create. And there you go. So I'm back to where I was. I've got my repo. It's a Docker repository, and it's in US Central 1. Okay, so now with that in place, this command might make more sense. Let me copy this. Okay, so basically, I just did it really quick. So, but this basically is authorizes Docker with this different domain name, right? And so because we're pushing to a different endpoint, basically. Okay, so now with that in place, we can actually see Docker images. So I don't need to rebuild an image. So I already have an image here earlier, this image ID right here. And what I can do is I can, instead of rebuilding an image, I can just tag this image with, so I say Docker tag, Okay, so I got to copy this though. So, okay, so I got to copy a couple things. Okay, so I got to go Docker tag this image. Then I want to copy and paste this, wherever this long. So I take the image and then I just basically tag it with a name. So this is the line, it's the same line, but tag it with an image name that represents what it's going to be stored as in the artifact registry repository. Okay. And then with that in place, I can just push that. If I can Docker push. Now, last time I did this took quite some time. And I'm guessing it, well, it's moving. I'm going to pause the video though, because it took me like 5 minutes. So let me pause this. I thought I'd just bust in for a minute, just show you the progress. It's been about 5 minutes. And see, you can see what's happening here is it's taking the image and it's having to push basically this entire container, all the intermediate container layers into the repository. And you can see that it's rather slow. I mean, I'm basically having to move about 500 megabits of data, and it's chunking along pretty slow. So one interesting sidebar here is that container registry seems to be a lot faster than, for whatever reason, than artifact registry, because this happened relatively quick in container registry. So I'm going to pause it again and wait till this is done. Okay, I think that took like 10 minutes. So obviously it was fairly very time consuming, needless to say. Okay, so after that, if you go back to repositories, under artifact registry, I should see if everything worked out right. I see my hello world here, and I can see the same tag. So it looks very similar to container registry. It's just got this extra layer of having you have your own repo, and then you have underneath there you have, so what do they call these things? They call these, they actually call these now images in the repo. So a little different terminology, but the same basic concept. I've got my images here and my tagged versions of them. Okay. Okay, so let's switch gears here. So far we've been doing all of our Docker build commands locally, right? So here we're going to use a service that Google has, which essentially allows us to run the build process in the cloud rather than on my machine. And that will probably be a little bit faster. I don't have to tie up my machine in the build process, right? So that's what Cloud Build does. At its basic, we're going to use it first to do exactly what we just did. Take a source code that has a Docker file, build it, push it into both. We'll do, I think, well, I forget. I think we probably do it. I think we'll just do it into one of the two repositories, right? And that's the simple example, but then we'll go through later on. We'll do some more complex examples where you can actually introduce different build steps that maybe does different things, right? So I don't think I'm going to get bogged down in the details of how to like customize Cloud Build, because we'll cover that later. See what else is there. Yeah, I think for now it's all we're going to cover. So what we should do is do the exercise of actually doing a manual build, basically replicating what we just did. So the command we're going to do is going to do a couple of things. First, it's going to take the code, compress it into like a zip file, right, an archive file. Then it's going to upload it to a bucket, so it's in the cloud. Then it's going to run some compute somewhere that's going to run basically the same thing that we ran, just Docker build, right? From that source code, produce an image. It's going to tag that image, just like we just tagged it, right? And then it's going to push it into container registry, just like we did a minute ago. So we can actually have that all run with a single command. So let's just, I'm going to copy and paste this here. So gcloud builds, submit, you tag it with the tag, and then the dot here is important. That's saying basically, that's like the Docker build dot, right? So just basically saying, this is the folder I want to work on. And I just run this, and you can see it's doing the same kind of thing that we were doing locally, where it's going to be, but it's kind of, here's your build steps and see. Yeah, so it looks very similar now to what we were doing locally, but this is actually just doing the log. It's logging in my screen from what's happening in the cloud. Okay, so this will take a minute to do. While that's going, I could also, if I want to do it with the same process, but with the artifact repository or registry, I can use this command, right? I'm just basically building it, but I'm tagging it with the artifact registry tag name, right? So that's how you do those two. So I'm not gonna jump ahead. I'm gonna wait for this to be done. It's actually already done. Okay, so you can see it's rather fast. And let's see, I'm not going to see a whole bunch as I did this in container registry. So I basically did put the image there. I did want to look at cloud build though. So let's see this. Cloud build. So cloud builds here. So I've been doing this, a couple examples, right? So this is from 39 seconds ago, right? And right, so this is, oh no, this is one from 7/16. This is one that just happened now. So this was the build that I just did, right? These were earlier builds as I was writing this article, but you can see, you can look at the logs of the build, right? Just like you can see it from your machine, right? So that's basically cloud build, right? Okay, let's continue on. So far we just kind of used the default behavior of cloud build, right? You can actually customize this to your heart's content. So let's see if I can cover the main theories of it. I think the easiest way of seeing this is looking at this build YAML file, right? So let's look at this here. So this is a new file I'm introducing, right? They haven't used it to date, right? So what you do is you basically are now providing steps, right? And then maybe some other configuration values. There's a lot of options in this thing. I'm just covering the basics. So what steps are is each step represents a container, a Docker container that runs, and it takes files and transforms them somehow, right? So these containers will perform some operation for you. Now, in this case, I've introduced skip this top one for a minute. Let's look at the second one, because this basically replicates what we were doing just with the default behavior. So in this case, I'm using this container, GCRIO Cloud Builder Docker. And that's an example of a Google supplied or Cloud Build provided image, right? And it takes arguments, in this case, build, tag, and then you basically, in this case, I'm building it to my artifact registry, right? And the build process can automatically recognize the project you're in. So that's why you can actually just, instead of hard coding a project in, you can use an environment variable, right? So that's basically does the build process. And then one of the default behavior, one of the options you have here is kind of a global option outside of steps, is to take any images that are produced as part of the process and pushing them to wherever they need to go. In this case, it's going to artifact registry. So that's what images does. It's a kind of an applied or a special step, right? That's outside the steps that will take any containers and push them, since that's a common behavior of Cloud Build. But then you actually introduce your own steps. So this is an example of a step provided kind of using a Google Cloud Build container, right? But this isn't actually, this node is actually a open source, this publicly available container image, right? In this case, I'm just running the npm command in it, and then it's test. So my package JSON has a test step. So I'm just going to run a test, right? So this is an example how you can have your own steps. And I think you can have up to 100 of these things. There's two other kinds of containers you can use here, right? So this one is kind of an open source, publicly available one. This one here is a Google Cloud Builder provided one. There are community-based ones that are pushed into Google container build, right? Specialized for container build or not container build, cloud build. But you can also create your own Docker images that basically can be inserted in this chain. Okay, so I think the best thing that we do here is just actually run the command to run this thing. So let's see. Oh, here it is right here. So in this case, we say gcloud build submit, and then I provide a config file. Before we were doing like actually providing a tag and stuff, right? So basically I'm telling it, run it through this option here. So let's do this. Cloud build submit. And this basically will do pretty much exactly the same thing it did earlier, except for introduced a new step to run a quick NPM test. So right now you can see step 0 is that's the node image that's pulling down, right? And again, this is all running remotely. I'm just seeing the output here. And I think it's already done with step 1. So basically it was successful. And then if any one of these steps fails, it will break the build, right? And then these are being obviously started in sequence. And then step 1, and it's doing the whole build the image and then pushed, and then the last step will be pushing the images. So it's still building an image here. Now it's doing the pushing here. And that's that images tag, and then we're done. And then if I go back to here, I should see a new build here. That's that top one, 722. That was about a minute ago, right? So that's that one. It took a little longer because we had the NPM step in it. Okay. So far, we've been doing everything by basically taking the source code from our machine, right? And then doing something with it, right? So the next step is, let's see, actually, I need to do it. Next step here is we're going to take our source code and we're going to make it available in a repository. So a typical repositories that code build will work with are either GitHub. Let's see which one's it. See if I can find it. Hang on. Of course, I can't find my docs here. Well, it works with GitHub and actually, it's written down right here. Or didn't write it here. Let me pause the video because I want to make sure I don't miss the, Bitbucket. So Cloud Build works with GitHub, Bitbucket, or it works with its own cloud source repositories. And we'll just use the cloud source repositories here. The general idea is we're going to take a source code, put it in the cloud, then we set up a build trigger, which is basically whenever there's something that happens in that repository, it goes to cloud build and says, do this access, basically that process we just did automatically. And we end up with a new container image, for example. Okay, so the way we're going to do this is go through the exercise of actually using cloud repository. So, okay, so let's go here. See if I can get this right without my notes. Cloud repository. So this is a long video, by the way, but I'm going to power through. That's called source repository. I'm getting all tangled up on all this terminology. Okay, so get started, create a repository, create a new repository, continue. Let's see if I can get this repository, hello world. I'm going to use my project, create. Push code. Okay, so I already have, I have the code on my machine already. Yeah. Well, yeah, I'll do it this way, I think. Okay, so one thing I've already did here, you'll need to do this on your own. I've already registered my local secure shell keys with Google Cloud. So that means basically I can now use secure shell to push my files around, right? So I've already done this, and I think I've already added this as, oh no, I haven't done that yet. So I've done step 1. You can do that on your own. But what I need to do is I need a local Git repository of this code. So the easiest way of doing this is let's see if I can get this right. Copy hello world to /desktop hello world. Okay, so now I have cd desktop, cd hello world. Okay, so I've got my folder. I need to get init. I need an initial commit. First commit. Okay, so now I have my files. Okay, so now I've got a repo on my local machine. So then I need to copy this command. I need to add Google as a remote. Okay, so that now I've got my local repository set up to be able to push to Google. So if this is going to work, so it's now pushing. Okay, so now if I go here and hit refresh, I should now see my files, right? And I've got this is my source repository called Hello World. Okay, the next step is now that I get my source code there, I need to connect it to Cloud Build so that whenever time a change happens here, it will automatically trigger Cloud Build to do the right thing. And I want to use my Cloud Build YAML. So let's see if I can figure this out. I think I go to Cloud Build. So I have to go to Cloud Build. Oh, I have to go not to this. I need to go back to Cloud Console because it jetted me out somewhere else. Okay, so I need to go Cloud Build. Cloud Build. I need to go to triggers. Okay, so the goal here is I want a trigger that will automatically, every time it runs, a change happens in the repo, it's going to trigger this thing to do a build. So where's create trigger? Of course, I can't find it. Manage repositories or create trigger. So by default, Cloud Registry, no, Cloud Source Repository is automatically connected to this. If you need to connect, if you're going to use GitHub or Bitbucket, you have to kind of connect it first. But since it's already kind of pre-connected, I can say my trigger, description, title, tags. So repository events that will vote say push to. So every time a new push happens to master, for example, I want to do this. So I'll do that. Repository, so it already knows about it. The master branch, right? So every time I push the master branch, it should, and then it's going to do a cloud build from a YAML. Yes, I already knew that there was a YAML file there. If I didn't have a cloud build YAML file, just say Docker file, right? And location repository, that's the file, cloud build YAML, which was the file that's there. I'm not going to do any environment variables or anything special, right? I just hit create. Okay, so now I can either manually run this or I can make a change to my code, push it, and see the build happen. So I think the real example would be to do that. So if I go to index.js, hello world, so I just add a hello world 2 to this. Okay, and then I hit git add all, git commit to git push Google, push Google master. And so that pushed a new commit to master. So then that trigger should have triggered. So if I go to history, I should probably have an active build happening. You can see it's happening right here. Okay, so that was basically cloud build. This will do its thing. The build will use that configuration YAML. We'll run the node test, and then it'll push the repository, but in a new container and push it to artifact registry. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about, and this is mostly just talking, is the deploy process. So if you looked at that diagram at the top here, the deploy process, they just mentioned Spinnaker. So what is Spinnaker? And then we're not going to do much with it because it's actually a very complex product, to be honest. But and there's easier ways of doing deploy other than Spinnaker. But Spinnaker is basically an open source, which Google was heavily involved in. It's a generalized cloud delivery platform, basically that lets you do that deploy step of the process. And it can deploy into any, and basically you can see the diagram here, you can deploy into all sorts of environments, not just compute engine, but it does all sorts of stuff, right? Personally, it's a little bit complex and maybe overkill, right? It does have built integrations into Cloud Build. So like it can take a Cloud Build event and then continue the process on and take the artifacts that you created and push them into, into the workloads. It turns out that cloud build itself, actually, you could add another step to your cloud build that does a deploy operation. So, matter of fact, that's this, and we're not going to do it, but if you wanted to do it, you can actually go through this example here, where this is basically using cloud builds deploy example. So basically here, they're basically running, the key to this thing is one of the steps. I can find it right here. So you can see one of their steps here is they're just running the gcloud command, and then they're running deploy cloud service, and they take the image that's maybe created on an earlier step, and then pushing it to, in this case, this is, what is this using? This is Cloud Run, right? So this is kind of a quick and easy way of, instead of having to like run a whole Spinnaker environment, you could actually just add a single new step to your cloud build and do the deploy operation all within your cloud build pipeline. Okay, so that's it for the video. I think that this build probably already done, right? So, and it's, you can see it was triggered by my trigger here, whereas these were manual builds. Okay, in the interest of time, I think I'll stop. So we're done.